Thank you for joining me today on Leading Today. As I mentioned in my welcome, I explained that I would share a story of my own journey through my career and its evolution around my experiences with leadership, learning about leadership, as well as what I think great leadership is, which we can only typically identify by what great leadership is not, period. This podcast will not always be in perfect form, as storytelling is not linear. So I would ask that as you indulge me and engage as my audience of listeners, that you would grant me grace as you hear not only my story, but the stories of others who I invite as guests onto the show on occasion. Today, I want to talk a little bit about my early entry into the workplace and my early experiences around leadership examples. Now, some of these stories will not paint pretty pictures, and some of these stories will. So, I will begin when I was in my earlier teens and movement into the workforce, and what I observed as early leadership traits, and to some extent, what shaped me and how I think about leadership, as well as the type of leader I knew I wanted to become. So, when I was about 15, I decided that certain experiences in school subjects, such as accounting, led me to believe that I wanted to become an accountant or a CPA. I graduated with really high grades in those courses and took to college to begin advancing that career aspiration. When I was in school, in college, I would say it was my sophomore year, I had the fortune, after working a couple of roles as like accounting clerk and AP and AR and getting experience that way, I was able to go into a role that was not far from the college I was attending and work in the AR department for a small privately owned manufacturing company. And I had a then great leader of the department and had a great relationship. She trusted me, and I looked to her for guidance to develop my knowledge in the space. Unfortunately, she had one weekend somehow broken her leg and needed to be off of work. And because I was her trusted partner in the department, which consisted of, I believe, four of us, she asked me to be like an interim supervisor that just would keep things on schedule, that we were balancing and reconciling accordingly on basically a month to month basis, as you typically have to do. While she was out, the VP of the accounting department, which was another female, left her role, and the owners of the company hired in a male who was pretty imposing in size, but we were a small team, and because it was a small organization, wherever we could, we would always help out another department. So occasionally, being in the AR department, if I finished work there, I would help out in the AP department. If the AP department didn't need help, then sometimes customer service would ask if someone from another department could assist, and I would sometimes lend a hand. On one particular afternoon, I had received an invitation if there was anyone on my team available to help in the customer service department. And while the other three on the team were busy, I was free. I had just concluded my work and said I could help for approximately 1 hour. While in the other, right next door neighboring department, after being there for pretty close to an hour and about to wrap up and go back to my own department, I suddenly heard my name in this rather loud voice being called from somewhere in the office that I was really somewhat unsure, but knew very clearly the way my name was being called that this was seemingly a problem. I proceeded to get up from my seat from the customer service department. The customer service manager, who was actually very kind and very supportive and always appreciative of any of my team's help, looked to me quizzically and said, as I passed by her, "Is everything okay?" To which I said to her, "Oh, I'm sure it is." And I proceeded to walk by her into the neighboring department, which was the accounting department, to see who exactly was calling my name, although I had a feeling of whom this was. Upon entering the department, my name was still being yelled out with a pretty strong expletive behind it because I was no longer in the accounting department and was next door at the customer service department. Remember, this is a practice that we help one another throughout the company. So when I arrived and I listened to the VP of accounting essentially berate me in front of a team of approximately 12 to 15, because there were the AP team, the AR team, and the neighboring customer service team who could hear this berating. I heard what he said. I said nothing actually in return other than, "You do not have to speak to me in that tone." To which he turned his back and something under his breath that I could not hear, which I'm sure was not kind just based on tone, and he proceeded to walk back to his office. Well, with this particular organization, it was the kind where you started very early in the morning and the end of your day would be around 3 or 3:30 in the afternoon. So lunch was around 11 a.m. and it was pretty close to lunchtime. When he went back into his office, the AP supervisor, who also was very kind, and this is a team of individuals that are diverse. We have got Hawaiian, we've got Filipino, we've got white or Caucasian, we've got Latin, we've got Black, we've got a very diverse group throughout the organization. The VP was a white male. That said, the AP supervisor, who was Filipina, was very much appalled as she had witnessed this berating for no good reason. The VP basically indicated he was upset that I wasn't sitting at my desk, even though he knew that, as mentioned before, helping other areas around the department was something that the company did. This was a way to maintain productivity, high levels of customer service without having to take on additional headcount. So if there was an individual available for generally a short period of time, people were welcomed and encouraged to go and help cross departmentally if they could. Well, lunchtime came and I left for lunch, but I drove home. And I got home about 30 minutes later and I called the AP supervisor, who, upon answering the call and listening to me just very briefly in the beginning, knew that I was unhappy and upset And she was very apologetic for the fact that I had been made to feel that way, even though it wasn't her fault. To me, she demonstrated great leadership. And in that same phone call, my respect took number one spot, my self respect. And I told her that I would not be returning to the workplace and for her to please cut my final check. Now, that's not an action that I took, and nor in this podcast would I encourage anyone to take. But sometimes, if you have the ability to do so, which I did because I still lived at home, the need to work wasn't one of those. It was an option to advance my knowledge in the accounting field. But I could find another job, and I knew that. So I had the ability to say, I don't want to return back to that place of employment if this is how the new VP is going to treat employees. So the accounting or the AP supervisor practically begged me not to quit because she knew the work that I provided was quality and the help that I provided to her department and others was also welcomed and appreciated. But I was not willing to go in and negotiate my self-respect under a leader who couldn't value teammanship, who could not respect me as an employee or as a person or as a woman. And I did not have the patience at that time to even attempt to explain why I believed his approach was wrong. In my mind, had I endeavored to do that, I probably would have been terminated because for him, he probably would have seen it as me usurping his authority. So I decided to resign, and I figured they could figure it out. He probably had someone lined up ready to take my role anyway. So this is the beginning of one of my stories and how this podcast may go. I share it with you to inform and help you create understanding about someone who myself, as a Black female, age 18, 19 years old at the time, was beginning to already see leadership styles and traits, was already beginning to shape the way in which I might see myself as a future leader. And so began my whole perspective on what that might look like as time moved forward in my career. So I share this with you and leave you with this final thought. How in your leadership journey, be it early on or experienced, have you changed the way you lead based on how you want to be perceived and respected by others? But who maybe helped you change that perspective? Think about that and think about how you got there or how you want to get there. I thank you for joining me today on the podcast Leading Today, and I look forward to you all and hearing the next story next week. Until then, I wish you great leadership.